Great. Right, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at this evening's webinar. I'm going to do a few introductions first of all. So I'm Jivani, I'm a local GP in Kingston and also a Borough Chair Lead as well in Kingston. On our panel, we've got Nick Kane, who is the Chief Nurse at Hounslow and Richmond Community Health Trust and Kingston Hospital. We've got Judith, who is the Chief Pharmacist at Kingston Hospital. We've got Charis Penfold from Kingston and Richmond's Children's Services. And we've also got Una Dalton, who's going to be joining us any minute now, who's the South West London Programme Lead for the COVID and flu vaccinations. We have received some questions in advance of the meeting, which we'll do our very best to answer, in addition to any questions that turn up during the meeting itself. And we understand that we may run out of time. We've got about an hour. And if we do, we will still answer those questions and put them on the website afterwards. So I just got a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We ask that all attendees are respectful during the meeting. This includes no swearing, being respectful of the previous speakers, no discriminatory or offensive comments or behaviour. And mainly it's going to be done through the chat. Whilst we're confident we won't have to, but should anyone behave in a way that does not abide to this etiquette, the event staff will be asked to exclude those members from the chat, and they will message you to explain why and remind you of the event etiquette as well. The uptake of the COVID vaccination in children aged 12 to 15 in South West London is good. But we know that many of you will have questions because obviously it's a new vaccine. Well, actually, it's not that new now. There's been over 6 billion across the world who have been vaccinated. But a lot of you will have questions that hopefully we'll be able to respond to this evening. Before we get on to the questions, we've got a good few points that we want to share. But before we come to the slideshow, what I'd like to do, I'd like to arrange for you to just take part in a small 10-minute poll, and then we'll try and repeat the poll at the end of the session to gather your views. So if you can just click on the elements on the answers that you feel are reflective of your feelings. So just carry on clicking, and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll leave the poll up, okay, so people can still enter the poll. But what we'll do first of all is actually go onto the slide pack, and I'm going to hand over to Nick, who'll go through the through the slides. But what I'll do is I'll just give you a brief introduction first, okay? So can you put up the slide pack if that's okay? Great. Okay. So I think that, as I've said, that we've got the panelist here. I'm not going to go through it again, but this is mainly to discuss that the program, this webinar is around the COVID vaccination program for the 12 to 15-year-olds. So we can come to the next slide, please. So this is the aim of the session. I think I've gone through that already. So I think I'm going to hand over to Nick now, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Naz. So obviously the aim of vaccinating this group aged between 12 and 15 is to protect them, themselves, their family and their friends. and the vaccination programme is being delivered, you know, through the school route primarily, although there are other sites where this group of younger people can have their vaccine. Next slide, please. So I'm really delighted to be part of this programme, and we've already started the vaccination programme in South West London, which is nearly 200 schools that we're aiming to do this programme within, and we're a third of the way through this. Many of you on this webinar will already have received a letter which is signed by me, encouraging your children or your younger people to have the vaccination. Within that letter, there is an information leaflet, and there was also a phone number and an email address should you have any questions or concerns that you can use. We're asking for parental consent, and there is an online consent form. And what we do urge is that parents complete that form 48 hours in advance of us going into the school, and that enables us to make sure that we take enough of the vaccine when we go into the school, which will enable your younger person to receive the vaccine. In recent weeks, you would have seen over half term that some hubs have been set up across South West London, which provides an alternative for your younger person to be vaccinated. And you can book an appointment there via the national booking system, or you can walk in. I just want to flag though that for younger people between 12 and 15, that they can't currently walk into community pharmacists to have their vaccine. So just that as a point of note. Next slide. So I've touched on it a little bit. So we are asking for parental consent for the vaccine, but what we really hope is that you make this decision with your younger person, and that this is a decision that is made unitedly. We do recognise though that there may be some younger people who express a wish to be vaccinated without having written parental consent. And if we deem as experienced school nurses that the younger person is able to consent, we will do everything possible to contact the parent and get verbal consent and vaccinate your younger person when we're in the school. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague Judith, who will take you through the rest of the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So why is it important for us to be vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds? The more people we vaccinate, the harder it is for COVID-19 to spread. And if people that haven't been vaccinated or can't be vaccinated, or they have a limited response to the vaccine, then the way to protect them is for everybody else to be vaccinated to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Getting vaccinated protects the person who's vaccinated. It also protects family, friends and community. It supports vaccination for people who are who have limited immune system, and it's much safer for your immune system to learn to fight an illness through vaccination than it is from actually catching and then being treated for that illness. And with vaccination, you get a much better vaccination response and immune response, and probably a longer immune response than if you've simply got the illness itself. Research has shown that having the vaccine helps to reduce your risk of getting seriously ill or dying from COVID-19. It reduces your risk of catching and spreading COVID-19, and it protects you against the variants of COVID-19 too. Young people are also at risk of developing long COVID, which many of you will have heard about. So it's important for our children to have this protection through vaccination. If there's a chance, you might still get or spread COVID-19. And so even though we're vaccinating children as we have the rest of the population, we still recommend, and it's important to give you the advice on how to avoid catching and spreading COVID-19. So one of the key questions that you've come on this call tonight to hear is it safe for my under 18s to have COVID-19 vaccine, and what are the side effects? All of the vaccines that are in use in the UK have met strict standards in terms of safety, quality and effectiveness, and that's set out by the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. So they determined when these vaccines came into use, which was in the first of which was in December last year. The research and data shown that there are common side effects that children vaccinated might experience. And this would be pain at the injection site, which is quite common to a variety of vaccinations, fever and headache. These reactions are usually mild, they're self-limiting, they're short-lasting, they usually last between 1 and 2 days. And in these circumstances, simple analgesics that you would normally have at home are perfectly acceptable to use after a vaccination. So in terms of the safety of COVID-19 vaccinations in children, although we say it's limited, 10 million children have actually been vaccinated, and there have been some rare reports of myocarditis. This is the inflammation of the muscle of the heart, and pericarditis, which is inflammation of the membranes around the heart, following the use of Pfizer vaccine and Moderna vaccines. But these are quite rare incidents and also quite limited. But when you consider it in relation to actually getting COVID-19 itself, if you're infected with COVID-19, your risk of both those two conditions is significantly higher than if you got the COVID-19 vaccination itself. And in children who have developed these conditions, it has been limited and it has resolved itself fairly quickly. So thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. So if we can take the slides down, I mean, we've got a few questions that have come in through as we've been talking, but also we've been given some questions before the webinar was started as well. So I'd like to do a mix and match, if that's okay. The first question that we've got up here is, my son, 12 years old, and my daughter, who has learning disability, have both just had COVID. Should they still get the vaccine? And what should the gap be between the virus and getting vaccinated? Nick, would you like to answer that?
Thanks, Naz. So what the guidance is currently saying is that you need to wait 28 days from when you've had the actual virus itself before we vaccinate. And the main reason for that is obviously to make sure that you are, feeling you've got over the virus itself. So we're waiting 28 days. Okay, thank you, Nick. Thanks. Just a couple of that have come through. One, it may be a silly question from Coeli. They've said it's maybe a silly question, but can they take a bath or shower after the vaccination on the day? And yes, you can. Okay. I'll just go back to the ones that came in before the webinar. One says that there's a question that says, what could be the long-term effects of the vaccine on teenagers, like fertility issues? So I'll take this. Essentially, menstrual changes are likely to be the result of the immune response to the vaccine rather than the specific vaccine component. Most people who report changes to the periods after the vaccination find that they return to normal within 1 or 2 cycles, and there's no evidence that it actually affects fertility. So there are some clinical trials that have been done, and looking at the unintended pregnancies occurring at similar rates in vaccinated and unvaccinated groups. Also, same could be said for assisted reproduction clinics as well. So I think I'll just go to another one that came in. What is the benefit to this group? Judith, can you answer this?
So the research has shown that vaccinating in all age groups, including children, that it reduces your risk of becoming seriously ill with COVID-19. It reduces your risk of being admitted to hospital, and it reduces your risk of ending up in ITU. So, it is a very general reduction in risk for severe complications associated with COVID-19.
Thank you. We've got another one that's come through on the chat. Many of the children are going through puberty. have there been any issues around the vaccine and changes during puberty, either short or long-term effects? The data that the JCVI look at show that there is no effects on puberty itself, either short-term or long-term, and it is quite safe to give. I think around about 10 million across the world have been vaccinated who are under 18. And I know that America have just authorized the vaccination program to be extended between 5 and 12-year-olds as well, to try and cope with the pandemic. So I hope that answers that question. We'll just go back to the ones that submitted before again. This one I think is for you, Judith. My child has a pretty severe needle phobia, and although she agrees to go to vaccine appointments, she hasn't had an injection for years as she panics and can't keep still. An ambulance worker suggested sedation might be an idea. Is that a possibility?
I wouldn't recommend sedation. I do think this is an incredibly common issue of needle phobia, and sometimes it's the fear of the injection rather than the actual injection itself. Our schools program vaccination team are incredibly experienced at looking after children of these age groups, and they routinely vaccinate in schools all the way through the year for a variety of vaccines, and so they're very experienced in managing anxiety in children. If your child has a particular issue with anxiety and vaccinations or any kind of injections, then please, when you're doing your consent form or through the school nurse, just highlight to them that your child may have a particular issue, and they can talk that through with you and the options that might be available.
Thank you. Another one that's come through on the chat, it says, do you consider the unknown risks outweigh the benefits that will protect the children, especially where there is a very small chance children get COVID and suffer bad from it? This has been it's a very good question. I think there's been an awful lot of discussion about this, and there's been an awful lot of a review of all the data that's coming through by the JCVI. As medics and doctors, we rely on the MHRA to assess the vaccine's safety, and also the JCVI to actually recommend the vaccination program and who should be taking it, who shouldn't be taking it. So I think, when we're talking about the vaccine in this group, what we're doing is that we're looking at the risks not just to the child but to others as well. So we need to just make sure that the child gets protected, because even though there's a small risk of the child getting COVID, the risk of getting COVID and dying is far outweighs the risk of actually side effects from the COVID vaccine. I think in the 10 million that have been vaccinated under the age of 18 so far worldwide, there haven't been any significant serious side effects or deaths from those cohorts, and that's the data that is coming through. So it's not just about the child, but it's also about protecting the people that the child comes into contact, because obviously the child can pick up a COVID asymptomatically, but actually pass it on to someone who's at higher risks, either someone who's immunocompromised, or the elderly, or someone who's older in their family, and actually they can get a significant problem with the infection itself. So I just want to just come to another one. Why would a child need to be vaccinated if they've already had COVID-19? Would they not have natural immunity? So I'm just wondering whether, Nick, would you be able to pick that up?
Yeah, and as I might defer to Judith on that one, if it's okay.
Okay. That's fine, yeah.
Okay. So if you had COVID-19, we know that for a period of time after that, you have an increased immunity, you produced antibodies. But what we don't know is how long those antibodies will last and how long your immunity will last for. So it's actually pretty important that we still vaccinate so we can be assured that we've given people the best immunity that we can against COVID-19, because it is still possible to get COVID-19 even if you've already had it. And we have examples of people who've had that. So it's still important to get that immunisation.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Judith. Another one here, it says about side effects in general from the COVID vaccine for children. There are some common side effects, and there's some much rarer side effects. So the common side effects can be having a painful, heavy feeling, tenderness in the arm where you've had the injection, and it tends to be worse for the first couple of days after the vaccine. You can feel tired, you can get a headache, you can get general aches or mild flu-like symptoms, and those tend to resolve within about 2 to 3 days. Now, I know there's been an awful lot of talk about myocarditis, and and it's been in the papers as well. The JCVI have looked at all the data. Now, myocarditis is a very rare side effect of the vaccination, and it would usually would symptomatically be very mild in people who get it from the vaccine itself. The common symptoms of myocarditis: shortness of breath when lightly exercising or walking, stabbing pain or tightness in the chest, which may spread across the body, difficulty breathing when resting, sometimes flu-like symptoms such as a high temperature, tiredness, fatigue, palpitations or abnormal heart rhythm. The evidence to date has shown in young people who have had the vaccine, a very small number develop mild, transient form of myocarditis, and it resolves. There is no evidence at this time showing which young people are more likely to have it following the vaccine and which ones aren't. Now, throughout the process with the JCVI, yellow cards are in place, which means that anyone can complete what we call a yellow card side effect profile and can submit it. And this is part of the data that is collected. But as I said, over 10 million under 18s worldwide have been vaccinated, and there have been no vaccine-related recorded deaths and no serious adverse events observed at this time. So if I can just come to another one which was written, how do we obtain certification of proof after vaccine? Now, the vaccination will be uploaded to your to a central system and to central records, and they will be actually then extrapolated into your GP records as well. And like with the adults, it'll be available on the NHS COVID Pass after a certain period of time. I'm just going to come to another written one. Are there statistics that prove it prevents children in this age range from getting very sick or ending up in hospital? Charis, would you be able to answer that?
Thanks, Naz. I mean, as we've said a couple of times, I think there is research that shows that the vaccine does reduce risk of getting really very seriously ill or dying from COVID, and reduces the risk of catching or spreading COVID for those that are near you or you live with, and also protecting against some of the COVID-19 variants. And we've also referenced some of the risks young people have of developing long COVID. So those are the kind of clear research pieces of evidence that we've got at the moment to support this.
Okay. Thank you very much, Charis. We've got another one coming through on the chat. I heard on BBC that the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisations, has advised against vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds. Why has it been decided to go against this advice? No, the JCVI have actually advised, we go by the JCVI, they're our Bible for vaccination. Nick, I don't know whether you want to add anything else onto that.
No, that's, well, just to say fully supportive and agree that they are, you know, the body that we refer to in terms of vaccinating, and certainly are pro our vaccination programme and encouraging this age group to be vaccinated.
So I think the JCVI did not recommend it right at the beginning because they didn't have the data to be able to support it. But once they've got the data and they can actually review it, they then make a recommendation about the age groups. It was the same during phase 1, 2, 3. They were making certain recommendations. We've got another one come through on the chat. It says, I'm really sorry, but I still can't see the benefits to this group. The risk of hospitalization is only 2 in a million. This is minuscule and a risk I will be prepared to take for my son. Is there any benefit to them getting it, passing it on, or being less symptomatic? I don't know who would like to take that one. Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand that perspective, and I suppose I see it from, you know, a slightly different angle, as we've discussed on this webinar already, in terms of, you know, protecting even friends, family, and the community from, you know, being more seriously ill with the virus themselves. And it's that coming together and trying to reduce the spread of COVID-19. And the more people who have the vaccination, the more benefit that has to the whole population. And I think it was Naz who touched on it before. I mean, many in this age group either maybe have friends that have got a vulnerability which make them more at risk, or live with a family member who's more susceptible, or in a community. So I think this enables us to do everything we possibly can.
Thank you, thanks, Nick. And one other thing that has been picked up on worldwide is, and also in the UK, is the number of school closures, the number of school days lost for the children, but also the teachers that have been affected by the COVID infections as well. And so what you're doing, you're protecting the not just the children, but everyone that the children comes into contact with as well. So I'll just go back to the ones that were submitted before. Will they only need, sorry, are there statistics that prove it prevents children? Oh, sorry, no, I've done that one. I really apologise. I'm sort of losing my place of it. Will they only need one jab? And will they need to have a booster? My son is not 12 until April 2022, but is in year 7 at secondary school. Will he qualify for the COVID vaccination then, and will it be available then? Nick, would you like to answer that one?
Thank you, Naz. So the current guidance is to offer one vaccination to the 12 to 15-year-old cohort, unless they have a vulnerability, which means that they would get a second dose. So at the moment, the priority is ensuring that this age group get at least one dose. And I definitely would think we would still be vaccinating in April. So I would say then that your son would be eligible to have the vaccine. And we may even see the guidance change further in the UK around the 5 to 11-year-olds before that time as well. So I do believe the vaccine would be available.
Thank you, Nick. So we've got another one from the chat. Also, my son has an egg allergy. He carries an EpiPen. Is it okay for him to have the vaccine? Judith, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, in all likelihood, yes. The vaccination team will assess anybody who's got an allergy, and indeed it's one of the key questions that they ask, both in consent and to the individual when they're getting vaccinated. So if we've got any doubts whatsoever that somebody should be vaccinated, we'll delay them till we've got a more detailed allergy history. But the majority of people are actually vaccinated on the day, and there's a very limited range of allergies that mean we won't vaccinate them on that day. And for those people, we actually review their allergy history in more detail, and potentially, if necessary, we refer them to a specialist allergy service for vaccination if we think there's a particular issue. So you can be assured that there's a really clear history taken around allergy, and that's also involved in that consent process that you go through when your form comes in.
Thank you. Judith, just while you're there, there's another question that if you can answer from, which came through before the webinar. Has there been any research for this age group for risks or long-term effects of having the vaccine? And the person who sent it in, I'm worried that this is not safe for my 12-year-old. Wish it had been trialled longer. Okay. Also, the JCVI report has not made me confident in allowing my daughter to have the vaccine. Would you be able to answer that, Judith?
Yeah, of course. I suppose it's worth going back to the history of COVID-19 vaccines. Everyone thinks that they've taken a really short period of time to actually develop, but actually the building blocks of making these vaccines have been in research for decades. They were available to us before we knew what COVID-19 was. And at the time that COVID-19 appeared and then was declared a pandemic, these very well-researched bits of technology to deliver vaccines were well developed and proven. So at that point, governments made the decision that they would share vaccines, and scientists decided that they would collaborate. So the usual process for a drug or vaccine is that individual companies fund it themselves. It takes them years to do. But in this instance, everybody shared their information, they shared their data, and we used global numbers of patients to do these studies. So we collaborated across entire countries and continents to make sure we had sufficient people in our clinical trials to give them the sort of power and information that we wouldn't normally manage in a short period of time. But we managed it because we did it as a global effort, and there was a massive investment in time and money for everybody to get involved in this. So the numbers of people who are involved in clinical trials in a very short period of time was huge. And that means that when we first launched these vaccines and they were approved by the MHRA and the American FDA and the European regulatory bodies, they had a huge number of patients who'd been involved. They had good knowledge of what side effects were. And moving through the vaccination programme, as more data became available, other groups were able to be vaccinated because we had more information. So we've now reached the point where we have enough data about children having received vaccine to show that they are safe. And 10 million children have had them worldwide without any significant issue.
Okay, thank you very much, Judith. We've got another one coming through on the chat. Is it possible to catch COVID-19 if you've had the vaccine? Is it really worth the risk to our children? If an individual risk assessment was carried out on each child, can you honestly say that it would be less risky to vaccinate children who are at practically zero risk of dying from COVID? I think that there are basically three groups that we're looking at here. The first group are the immunocompromised. Now they're at very high risk, and so therefore we would always advise them to make sure, in the same way that they get vaccinated against flu, but also make sure they get vaccinated against the COVID-19. There is a second group of children who would be in close contact with the people who have got immunocompromised situation. So that group, we're advising that they also have 2 doses, same as the immunocompromised immunocompromised group. And then there's a third group who are just the children who are usually fit and healthy. We are recommending 1 dose of the vaccine for that cohort, but you can't assess those children on an individual basis as who's going to die from COVID out of that group and who's not. It's really difficult. I mean, we have had, in the same way that we've had very fit and healthy adults dying from COVID. COVID has taken children as well. And these are mostly, it is to do with children who are immunocompromised, but there have been fit and healthy ones. So, so it is about protecting the children plus their close contacts. There's another one that's come through that says, are you still recommending one dose? I've recently heard that they may need a 2nd dose to be covered, but this increases the risk of heart inflammation. Judith, do you want to take that as well?
Sorry, could you give me the last end of the question? Sorry.
Are you still recommending 1 dose? Recently, I heard they may need a 2nd to be covered, but this increases the risk of heart inflammation.
Yeah, at the moment, we're recommending 1 dose. That's based on the JCVI recommendation, and until they make another recommendation and we've got more data, we would, for the lower risk groups of children, we would stick with 1 dose. Obviously, with children who are immunocompromised or have other health needs, we will be continuing with 2 doses for those, and that's in line with the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I'll just go back to our pre-webinar submitted questions. My son, 12 years, and my daughter, who has learning, I think I've already had this, I think. Yeah, I think I have. So what could be the long-term effects of the vaccine on teenagers, like fertility? I think, as I said previously, that there There are some menstrual changes that can occur for the first 1 or 2 months, but that's more related to the immune response. But there are, in the clinical trials at the moment, there's no view that there is any problem with fertility at all. As I said before, that the clinical trials with unintended pregnancies occur at similar rates in vaccinated and unvaccinated groups, and also the same has been shown in assisted reproduction clinics as well. I think I've got a few duplications here, so I do apologise about this. So if I can just come back to the questions from the chat. My 13-year-old son has had COVID last month. Should I not wait a few months, as he would have built up some immunity? Nick, would you be able to answer that?
Thank you. So we are recommending that this age group do get vaccinated 28 days, so kind of 1 month after they've had the COVID virus, if they've had it. But I do understand that there may be some immunity, but we definitely are recommending the 28 days as the timescale to wait.
Thank you, Nick. Another one that's come through on the chat. I've had a side effect to the vaccine which relates to my heart. I'm therefore reluctant to get my child vaccinated. How can you convince me otherwise? Judith, would you be able to answer that? Or do we need to take that one away?
If it's a personal, you know, if it's an individual issue, then I think we probably want to deal with that for that person. But in general, for children, it is a safe vaccine, and the risks to children who are infected with COVID-19 in terms of heart issues are significantly higher than the vaccine, and that's where the vaccination committee come in, where they balance that risk for us and try to explain that risk in terms of your risk if you get COVID-19 and your risk if you get vaccinated. And in all of the studies, being vaccinated is safer than getting COVID-19.
Thank you. Thanks, Judith. There's another one that's come through on the chat. Is there a full risk assessment for this age group available yet? So I think I've answered that in the previous questions around the immunocompromised contacts, but there aren't specific risk assessments for the children who are fit and well. If I can come to another one, isn't it possible to still pass on the COVID-19 virus even if you are vaccinated? Nick, would you be able to deal with that?
Yes, so we know even if you're vaccinated, you can still contract COVID. It's the severity of the COVID that the vaccination helps with, but also it does reduce some of the transmission. But yes, definitely you can still transmit it, but it is less, and the severity also tends to be less.
I think in quite a bit of the data, when we're looking at some of the adult data, and I know this is adults, that even though this third wave, the numbers are really quite high, the actual admissions and the ICU, admissions to ICU and the ventilated patients who have been vaccinated are much, much lower compared to the second wave when we had only just started the vaccination programme. I think as a supplement, sorry, is someone, Judith, did you want to come in?
No.
Okay. As a supplement, I think I think this is linked to a previous answer. Sorry, I meant to say that that should I not wait to get him vaccinated, as he must have built up some immunity that should last a few months at the very least. Now, we do know that there is some immunity. We're not sure how long it lasts on the individual basis. We think probably around about 6 months, but as regards having COVID-19 and utilising that as your immunity, we are recommending that you have the vaccine after 28 days. So we wouldn't advise to wait longer, just because there may well be the possibility of immunity there. There's another one here that says, have you taken, children take a large number of vaccinations in their early years, MMR, BCG, etc. Are children's immunity system not protected by these vaccines with COVID-19? So, Judith, I think just
COVID-19 vaccine is specific for COVID-19. So you've got lots of vaccines. We have MMRs, Hib, tetanus, but they're very specific for the disease that they're trying to prevent. So if you're asking, do the previous vaccinations charge up somebody's immune system to protect them against COVID-19? Unfortunately, no, it's quite specific. In terms of children and having vaccinations and that worry around having too many vaccinations, if you like, when you're a child, children's immune systems are designed to learn about infections so that as they grow, they're protected as adults. That's part of the immunity system that children develop, and it's part of their, if you like, their growing up process.
Thank you. Thanks, Judith. There was another one here that said, your presentation mentioned the vaccine will protect from other future strains. Can you know that for sure? And is there any research around this? So Judith, do you want to answer that?
As each strain has been identified, scientists have tested whether the current vaccines work. In some instances, the vaccines are working very well. In some of the variants, there's been a reduced efficacy, but on the whole, these vaccines are holding their own against variants. Do we know that they will hold against future variants we haven't seen yet? No, we don't. But we know that so far they are definitely holding their own against the current variants.
Okay, and we've got another one here, which is probably for you, Judith, again, but I think you partly answered it before. How have the vaccines been in research and development for decades? I thought COVID-19 is a recent virus, around 2 years.
Sorry, I should have explained that better. Scientists have been going to work for years to create these vehicles for us to deliver vaccines in a better way. And so the decades of research around the components, the vehicles to deliver vaccines with, we didn't really know what COVID-19 was until December 2019, hence why it's called COVID-19. But the very first version of the DNA map of that COVID-19 vaccine arrived with researchers making COVID-19 vaccine within a few short weeks of it being identified. And they then used the vehicle that they developed through their research to actually develop the vaccines that we've got now. And obviously we've got a wide variety of vaccines globally now available to us. But that's what I meant by decades of research, because most of these things are in the back room and somebody's been working on them for many, many years. And we find something that it will be useful for. And the same you may have seen in the news recently, we now have a malaria vaccine.
Yeah, that is quite an amazing advance. Okay, so just on the process, Nick, can I ask you? There's just in the chat, who gives the vaccination? Are they qualified clinical staff such as nurses and doctors, or unqualified staff who are working at the vaccination centres? Also, are medics present at the vaccination centres in case of any medical emergencies?
Thank you. So the programme that's running across South West London and in the schools is being undertaken by very experienced vaccination nurses. So there are the qualified nurses who are school nurses by background and familiar with vaccinating children, or who've had experience with a vaccination programme. So they're all qualified nurses who are delivering the vaccination and actually very, very experienced. We're not being joined by medics in the schools because, as we talked about in terms of the side effects and what we're expecting, the nurses' expertise and experience is actually enough to manage any potential difficult situation that may arise.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. I think there was another one. It says here, how can you commit to saying that the vaccine will not affect fertility when it's a new vaccine? I'll start and then I'll just get Judith to come in. So I understand that that there are concerns, but the vaccine has been around for quite a while already. It's almost a year since the beginning of the programme of vaccination. Across the world itself, as I said, 6 billion people have been vaccinated against COVID-19. 3 billion have had double vaccines across the world. There's an awful lot of data, and with the Joint Committee of Vaccinations and Immunisations, they look at the data as it's coming along. So they don't just say it's a free-for-all for everyone. They have to do it in stage, in a staggered, staged process. As the data comes through, they look at it, assess it, and then make a recommendation or not make a recommendation until the data is robust enough to be able to come up with that recommendation. And all the data that we've got so far from those billions of vaccines that have been issued so far show that there isn't any effect on fertility. This was brought up many months ago when the vaccine program just started, and we were slowly starting to get the data coming through, but we've got such robust data now that the JCVI are stating that it does not affect fertility. I think that I was just wondering whether we had any others on the submitted questions. I couldn't see because I think I had a lot of duplicates on mine thing. I can't see anything else. No, I think that's it. I think there have been a couple of comments around who's liable if there's any problem with the vaccine. So what we'll do, we'll take that offline, and we will then submit that on our website about liabilities around the vaccines. But I don't have that answer for me at this time. Let me just reading through some of the other questions. So sorry about this. So it says here, why has there been improved stability profile in the vaccination uses tromethamine, tris buffer, instead of the phosphate buffered saline PBS? I'm sorry, this is really quite technical. What's the difference? I don't know, Judith, do you know about that?
Well, I've got a full list of, we're talking about Pfizer vaccine for vaccination of children in this age group. And I've got a full list of the excipients, the other ingredients apart from the vaccine. I'm not recognising that at all. So I do have a full list of the ingredients, and from what you said, I'm sorry, I can't see the whole chat. So I'm just having a look back to see if I can see it.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult because I think it's I think the comments are a bit broken, but we'll take this offline and just clarify. Yeah. But as far as I'm aware, I've not heard of those elements within the vaccine itself.
No.
I think there was another one that says, is there anything that suggests this might become a vaccination that is required on an annual basis like the flu vaccine? Nick, would you be able to answer that, or Judith?
Well, we're deferring to each other on this one, I think.
I don't mind starting off, but I don't want to hog the conversation. So the flu vaccine is developed on an annual basis because of the different strains that come out every year. And so the flu virus vaccine is actually tailored for the predicted flu virus that's going to be coming out that year. Now, the COVID-19 vaccine may well need to be on that sort of basis, but we don't know yet. We just haven't got the data to say this will have to be done every 6 months or every year. We do know it may well be that COVID-19 is around with us for another 1, 2, 3 years, but we just don't know until we see the data coming through. So I think that we would have to rely on the JCVI to actually look at the data and actually make a recommendation to us about what is the best way of protecting the population. So I'm sorry that's not a full answer, but it's as best as we can give at the moment. The other one, it says here, can you please confirm yes or no, does the JCVI support vaccines in 12 to 15? I think that's a very quick yes. It's in the JCVI documentation, in the Green Book, the COVID-19 Green Book. So I think I'm just going to go to the next one. Are there any animal ingredients in the vaccine? Judith, do you want to answer that?
Not from, I've looked down the ingredient list I've got next to me, and that would be a no.
Yeah, it's a no from me as well. Let me just have a look. It says, I pre-submitted a question regarding access arrangements for autistic children who are home educated and may require quite an individual approach to managing the vaccine process. Ideally, my son would need a drive-through appointment, as getting him to any medical facility is horrendous. How accessible can we be? I don't know whether Charis or Nick would be able to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, just to say that this is definitely something we're exploring at the moment, because we recognise how important it is to get this group of younger people vaccinated too, in terms of the drive-through model, but also there's some slight challenges around how we move the Pfizer vaccine, which means vaccinating at home is currently quite difficult. But that doesn't mean that we're not trying to find a solution to that. So we're working very closely with our CCG colleagues to try and work a strategy to get the vaccine to those who are homeschooled or challenges mean that they have to be at home.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. There's a comment in here that says flu virus changes far more than any COVID variant. I think we've had about 5 COVID variants so far. The flu virus, we just give one vaccine every year because you can sort of predict what the virus changes are going to be. And so it's just one flu virus a year. So I know it does contain 4, so it's a quadrivalent. Judith, would you like to just expand on that?
Okay, so in terms of flu vaccine, or
so what it says here is flu virus changes far more than any COVID variant, and I think this is in response to me answering the question around whether it's going to be an annual vaccine.
It may well be that COVID mutates and we move past Delta. That is possible, and it is possible, and it has been widely reported that we may need to consider tweaks. But at the moment, the spike protein that we're using to invoke an immune response with these vaccines is staying fairly stable. There are aspects of it that are changing. So for instance, as we know, the Delta variant means it's more transmissible. But it is possible, but we don't know, that we may need to change part of the vaccine in the future. But because we have the genetic code and we can read that, we will be able to make those changes. Whether COVID vaccine ends up in the flu vaccine, that's been seen in previous variants where we've had like H1N1. When that one came out too, that became part of our standard, if you like, kit for winter.
Thank you. Thanks, Judith. I think there was another one that says here in the chat, if the vaccine is safe to have in this age group, why are they only given one vaccine? Also, would one vaccine give sufficient immunity? So I'll start this. The JCVI recommendations at this time are for one vaccine in fit and healthy children, 2 vaccines in those in contact with or have immunocompromised situation. They will obviously be continuing to review this to see whether a second vaccine does need to be given and at what sort of interval. But Judith, I don't know whether there's anything else you want to add on that.
No, we are very reliant on the JCVI. They have the full data set as to when to recommend extending. Obviously, you get a really good response from that first vaccination, and the second poll's just come on, and the second dose that adults are having to get the increased immunity, but children are developing a good immune response with that first dose. And so it seems reasonable to give them that first dose, to give them that level of protection, and that will support in terms of things like disruption to schools and making sure our children get their education.
Okay, thank you, Judith. I'm conscious of time. I think we've got the poll has just come up for the second poll. So if people can just spend the next couple of minutes just answering the second poll. I'm really sorry about any questions that we haven't answered, but we will take them offline and we will answer them on our website after the session has finished. So can you answer the second poll if that's okay? And while you're doing that, I just want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank Charis, Judith, Nick and Una. And also I'd like to thank everyone who have been submitting the questions. And I'm sorry if we haven't got around to some of the questions. And the ones that we haven't answered, as I said, we will be taking them offline and we will be submitting them on our website. Right, is there have a look. Okay, so conscious of time, is there anything else that we need to go through here? No? Okay, as I said, we'll be answering the rest of the questions offline and then we'll be submitting them on the website. Thank you very much for people who are attending tonight, taking their time out of their busy schedules, and thank you very much for the panel members tonight. So I hope you have a safe evening and thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.